All right, Hilltown, so go ahead and open your Bibles to Luke chapter 1, where we will be again this morning. Luke chapter 1. And our theme this year for Advent, you can see it on the banners behind me. You can see it on your bulletin covers. Our theme this year for Advent is peace on earth. And we get that from the book of Luke, right? Where in Luke chapter 2, there are angels guarding their there are shepherds out in the fields at night, guarding their flocks at night, and the angel of the Lord shined among them, right? And then just a few verses later, we read a whole multitude of heavenly hosts join that angel, singing to God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth, peace." They proclaimed peace. And it makes you wonder, okay, so if God said peace on earth, and if Jesus, at the end of his ministry on earth, said, "My peace I give to you, my peace I leave with you," it makes you wonder, what was he talking about? What were they talking about? Because if you look at our world today, it does not look like a world marked by peace. 2020 is going to be known for a lot of things. It will not be known as a year of peace. I think of all that has happened. Think of all the headlines in this past year. Think of, the obvious, the quarantine, the virus, and the pandemic, the fear, the scrambling, the distrust, the accusations that have ensued from that, the rioting and looting, the burning of our cities in response to the unjust deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. We could go on, right? The turmoil around the election, or the elections, plural. It's been a crazy year. So peace on earth? Really? What did God mean when he said peace on earth? Is it something that was metaphorical and not literal? If it is literal, how do I make sense of it? And this is important for us because it's very similar to the question where a lot of skeptics will wrestle and find themselves butted up against this question of how can a good God allow such bad in the world? How could a good God allow for evil? It's very similar to that question. How can God declare peace has come, peace on earth? How could Christ say he's given us his peace if this doesn't feel a whole lot like peace? It pushes us to say, all right, well, we need to find the reconciliation of these questions. And what we see in the Bible is this inbreaking of this God-given peace through the lives of God's people. And in the passage we're about to study in Luke chapter 1, we're going to see this rising story that rises to a point of climax and resolution. And it's the climax and resolution of a conflict. And there's a story within the story here in Luke chapter 1. And we're going to see that it comes to a point of peace. It comes to a place of peace, not just in some literary fashion of resolution and peace, but an actual, like this deeply personal place of peace. It's going to get really personal. And we're going to see peace come into this home. We're going to see peace spring from a heart. And it's going to teach us something about the kind of peace that God's talking about. And we're going to see that peace on earth begins in me. And the peace that I experience in the world begins with with me in my heart who I am to the world and why I am and how I can engage with the world around me. Peace on earth begins with me. So, because this is a story, because we're picking it right up in the middle here, we need to review, especially for those who may not have been here the first week, a couple of weeks ago. So remember, we're in Luke chapter 1. It's a long chapter. We're going to be picking up in verse 57 with the birth of John the Baptist. But in order to get there, in order to get our minds into verse 57 and caught up there, we have to go back to the first verses of the chapter where we read about this man named Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth. Zechariah, there's a man named Zechariah. Can somebody tell me, what was his occupation? What did he do? He was a priest. Yeah, so what city did he serve in? Where was the temple? Do you remember? The capital of Jerusalem. Sorry, I just said it. The capital of Israel is Jerusalem, the holy city. And he served in the temple in Jerusalem. He was a priest of the Lord's. He was part of the Levitical priesthood. So historians tell us that there were something like 14,000 priests in that time. So lots were cast. Zechariah had the privilege of serving in the temple on a particular day to bring the sacrifices of the incense on that day, which means it was a once in the lifetime type of opportunity for Zechariah. Zechariah was married. He had a wife named Elizabeth, and the two of them were, it seemed, happily married. They were a righteous couple, a beautiful, godly couple, but they had one main burden, one main weight, one main pain that they were carrying around. Luke 1 says, they were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord, but they had no child because Elizabeth was barren and both were advanced in years. So they wanted a baby. They wanted a child. But they also, at this point in their life, probably had come to the point of recognition, this isn't going to happen for us. And we're kind of mourning the loss, mourning the death of that dream, that opportunity. In their culture, it was a mark of shame if you didn't have a child. It was a mark, like they understood, they believed that perhaps God didn't approve of you or your family if you didn't have a child. So, one day, on that day that Zechariah was chosen to serve in the temple, he goes in, he's offering the incense. It's just him. There's nobody else in the building. And in front of him appears Gabriel, the angel of the Lord. In person, right? This isn't a vision. This is not a dream. Gabriel, he comes from heaven and appears and stands right before Zechariah. And he says, hey, Zechariah, good news. Your prayer has been heard. And your wife Elizabeth is going to bear you a son. And you're going to have to name him. What is his name? You tell me, what's his name going to be called? John, right? And John is going to grow up and he's going to pave the way. He is going to prepare hearts for the coming of the Messiah. And so here's Gabriel standing right in front of Zechariah in the temple, in the holy place. And how does Zechariah respond? He responds with skepticism, and he says, how can I be positive that this is going to happen? And he says, because I'm old and my wife is old. How on earth could I know for sure that this is going to happen? And so Gabriel responds to him. He sees that skepticism. He sees that lack of faith. And he says, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. And I was sent to speak to you, to bring you this good news. There's a play on words here. Speak and good news. And behold, you will be silent and unable to speak until the day that these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time. In other words, let me help you appreciate the power of words and the power of my words and my message. Right? I'm going to take your words until the point where you believe mine and obey mine. And Zechariah comes out of the temple, unable to speak, simply making these wild signs. And the crowd that was outside, gathered outside to pray, was bewildered and wondered at what on earth had gone on inside that space. So now think like a movie. 9 months later, this is where we pick up in verse 57. So read with me Luke chapter 1, verse 57. Luke writes, "Now the time came for Elizabeth to give birth, and she bore a son. And her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown great mercy to her, and they rejoiced with her." It's such a sweet picture of the community of believers, right? The community of saints, where we mourn with those who mourn, we rejoice with those who rejoice. This is such a great little picture of this. And it literally says, the Lord had magnified, think of a magnifying glass, had magnified his mercy toward her, like a magnifying glass that you're putting in the sunlight and kind of concentrating all of that light onto that one point. She is in the spotlight of God's mercy here, right? He miraculously let her get pregnant in the first place. He graciously held her and kept her through the childbirthing process, which for anybody back then was dangerous. For somebody of her age was even more dangerous. So he brought them both, her and John, safely through childbirth. And in their culture, it was significant that they had a boy. And so Elizabeth is fulfilled, right? Her dreams, in that sense, her dreams have come true. Yes, there's more to be done. There's more work to be done, right? Raising this child and so on. But like in a sense, the resolution seems to have happened. So it's all good, right? The end. John grows up, turns into a godly man. Zechariah and Elizabeth live happily, quietly, ever after. But no, that's not where this story stops. In fact, this is where it gets interesting. This is where this very odd tension is introduced into the story here. Verse 59. "And on the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child." That's not the odd part. Circumcision was the sign of being a part of the covenant family. Leviticus 12:3 says it has to happen on day number 8. By the way, I was wondering this. Maybe you're wondering this. Why? Who's they? Like, who on earth are they? Like, they came to circumcise the child. Who's they? And because part of me was thinking, well, Zechariah is a priest. Why couldn't he do this himself? But there's no stipulation in God's law as to who circumcises the child. You have to have it. It has to happen on day 8. But customarily, in their time, there would be a designated person in their town, in their village, who would come and perform this ritual of circumcision. And so whoever they were, they came. They knew it was day 8. I need to come, so they showed up. Verse 59, it says, "So they came to circumcise the child, and they would have called him Zechariah, after his father." So these friends, the family, and this person, probably a man who was here to circumcise the child, they decided, like, and I'm glad. I'm glad for Elizabeth that she has good friends that are rejoicing with her, right? But what kinds of friends are these that they would say, "Hey, so we've been thinking, we're going to name your son Zechariah," right? Like, has anybody here ever tried to name their friend's child for them? Maybe in jest, but not seriously. This takes some gall, I think, for them to say, "Yeah, it took us a little while to decide, but we've come to an agreement. We're going to name him Zechariah." Zechariah is a good name. Zechariah literally means Jehovah has remembered. So it's a good name. And it would make sense because Zechariah the man is now locally famous because of what happened in the temple. A lot of people in that region would know something unique is going on with this man. Something's happening here. And so his name would be well known, his personality would be well known. Maybe they wanted to just ride on that and say, "Hey, let's keep this going. This is a good name." How does Elizabeth respond? Verse 60. "But his mother answered, 'No, he shall be called John.'" So not for a moment did she hesitate. Zechariah couldn't talk, but, and we're going to learn, he could write. he had a tablet, or he had several tablets. Back in those days, what they would do is they would take a flat, smooth piece of wood, and at the end of the day, they would take a candle that had been burning, it was filled with melted wax, and they would pour it onto that piece of wood and pour a puddle, or even like smear it around and cover the piece of wood. It would harden overnight, and the next day they would have this wax-covered piece of wood that they would etch in with a stick or a stone, and they could write and communicate to one another through these tablets. And interestingly enough, Luke actually says, he calls this a prescription tablet in the original language. This was something that doctors would use to write prescriptions. So, somewhere over the last 9 months, he must have made good use of a tablet like this, because she knew what Gabriel had said. She knew his name needed to be John. And so she says, he shall be called John. So what do the friends say? The friends say, okay, you know what, Elizabeth, it's your decision. We trust you. We get it. John it is, right? No. These crazy friends. They don't like what Elizabeth says, so they keep pushing. So the tension keeps climbing. So the story is moving into a particular point here. And it's kind of like, Luke is, it's a good story writing. Luke is pushing you to see the best is yet to come. Like the point of the story is yet to come. Verse 61 says, and they said to her, none of your relatives is called by this name. Verse 62, so they made signs to his father, inquiring what he wanted him to be called. So more tension, right? Verse 63, he asked for a writing tablet and wrote, his name is John. And you have to notice the tense. Notice the way he wrote that. Not like Elizabeth, who said, he shall be called. Not he shall be called, but his name is. Present tense, already done. John. And here's why this is so significant. For Zechariah, this boy had already had a name for 9 months now. This isn't a matter of choice. This is a matter of obedience. His reply shows submission. Now think about what he said 9 months ago. That was not submission. His reply here shows submission. And in this moment, Zechariah shows that he was controlled not by peer pressure, doing what friends wanted him to do, not by self-promotion, making his name great, and not by custom or culture, what happened to be popular in his immediate circle at that time. But by God. That's what he was controlled by, specifically the Word of God, the message of God, the will of God for him. So this is where it kind of comes to bear for us today. So think about his situation. There's all this unrest, all this, even in this micro drama that's happening. There's all this unrest around him about what's happening with this boy, but not for Zechariah. He is totally at peace, and his reply shows that peace on earth begins in me. And peace, even who he was to the people around him, to these immediate friends, to the culture around him, to the story, the redemptive story of God, he fell in line. He found his place in line under submission to the authority of God. Think of all the unrest that you have felt in the recent past. Think of some of the tension that you've felt in the recent past. How much of it is due to what others think of you? How much of it is due to some measure of success? or desire to make a name for yourself? How much of it is due to what's popular with the people that you hang out with? Zechariah found that the greatest freedom comes from submission. He didn't care what they thought. He didn't care about his own great name. He cared about being obedient. Finally, right? He cared about being obedient and trusting God. And that's what freed him and gave him peace. So, what's the response in the story? What's the response to this, to his declaration that his name is John? How does all of this tension finally and actually resolve? How does it come to a point of peace? Verse 64 says, "And immediately his mouth was opened and his tongue loosed, and he spoke, blessing God." So blessing God, not bitter, not cursing God, but blessing God. Sometime, somewhere over the previous 9 months, leading up to this point, Zechariah at some point came to grips with the reason for the trial that God had put him through by taking his ability to speak, taking his ability to communicate. And it worked, right? His last words spoken were an expression of doubt. The very last thing he said to Gabriel, and that was an expression of doubt. So his first words here spoken are an expression of trust and praise, blessing God. So his somewhere along the line, his heart was aligned. In other words, God used that difficult season where he took something from Zechariah to transform Zechariah's heart, to bring him to a place of peace and rest and submission. And it makes me think of us today, right? Where God is, it seems the Lord and this world has taken so much from us over the last 9 months. And it would be a waste. It would be a total waste if we, when this is over, and it will be over, when this is all over and it's said and done, for us to kind of breathe this this heavy sigh of relief and say, finally, and to kind of shake our fists and say, darn you, 2020, and to be embittered and to look back and to groan about all that was taken away, versus to say, all right, Lord, first of all, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing in me? How are you able to use this to transform me? How can I redeem this time, redeem this pain, redeem this loss in such a way that at the end of it, I see your good hand, and I can't wait. The first thing I get to do is just to sing your praise and to bless you for being the good God that you are. Is it possible that you have an opportunity, a huge opportunity, right here, right now, that's very much like Zechariah, where you can come out singing God's praise as a result? I think of this Dutch proverb that I heard a little while ago. Pressed to my cross, the rod was sent. Seek not the cause, but the intent. Right? In other words, when you have an opportunity for trial and frustration, your job, your homework is to say, Lord, what are you doing in me? What would you have me become through this that I couldn't become if it weren't for this? One little hint of God's love for his son Zechariah is this word immediately. Did you notice this in verse 64? It says, immediately his mouth was open. So he writes, his name is John, and immediately his mouth is opened. It's as if God could hardly wait, right, to free him from this disciplinary action. He could hardly wait to restore him and to bring things back to rights. It's as if God was saying, well done, my child, well done, Zechariah. You did it, you get it. And now you've submitted, you've been obedient, you trust me, you get it, good job. And he rewards him right away. He doesn't delay. God's not like, well, he owes me a little bit more here. No, he could not wait to give back to Zechariah his speech. And so here, this obedience it's been affirmed by Elizabeth, it's been affirmed by Zechariah, and here it's actually affirmed by God himself through this miraculous turn of events. And what about the neighbors? Verse 65, it says, "And fear came on all their neighbors, and all these things were talked about through all the hill country of Judea." In other words, like these were the early tremors of the spiritual quake that was coming through the revival that would happen through the preaching of John when he grew. God was on the move. God was in their midst. And it says that in the next verse, 66 says, "And all who heard them laid these things up in their hearts, saying, 'What then will this child be? For the hand of the Lord was on him.'" God got their attention. He got them wondering, what is God up to? What is this child going to become? And that's exactly what God wanted to do. It's exactly what Luke wants to do for us as readers, because when we ask, who is this John? We see him grow, and John's going to get us to ask, who is this Jesus? He's going to point to the Messiah that we need. So when we see this, when we look at Zechariah, that high point of that moment when Zechariah writes his name in obedience and is rewarded with being made right, being restored, and being made whole, we see that peace on earth begins with me. And that peace begins with surrender, right? Not giving up in our rebellion against our loving God. In the past year or so, Ella, our oldest daughter, she's not here. I was hoping she was here so she could hear this story. But Ella has grown so much. She's hit a growth spurt. But Evangeline, our other daughter, has not. Evangeline's 4. So Ella is big enough where she could just pick Evangeline right up and take her wherever she wants to go, which can be comical at times. And at one point, Ella and Evangeline and I, we were heading out for a hike. We were going to get in the car. The two of them were just giggling and laughing, and Ella had Evangeline on her hip. And they were having a lot of fun. But I said, "Hey, Ella, it's time to go. Can you put Evangeline in a car seat?" And so she goes over to the car, opens the door, and she tries to put Evangeline into her car seat, but Evangeline would have none of it, right? She did not want to go into her car seat, and so she starts clawing and grabbing and grabbing anything and everything that she could on Ella, her hair, her nose. At one point, I looked over, and Ella and the two of them were just laughing so much. It was great, but Ella was like laughing in frustration also. Ella was laughing so hard, her mouth was open. Evangeline just flat out grabbed her teeth and used that as a handle and would not let go. I felt like Ella was trying. It looked like Ella was trying to put some feral cat in a fire pit, like just the way that this whole thing was happening. And it made me think, like that's in a way, I feel like that's kind of a picture of some of us sometimes. When God is trying to accomplish something, he's trying to move us, he's trying to carry us into something, and we're fighting against him in some dramatic ways. We're like in our own little rebellion, we know he loves us. We know what he's trying to accomplish in us is good, but we resist, and we fight, and we grab, and we pull, and we push, and we do whatever we can to not do what God wants for us. You will never have peace on earth until you have peace with God. You will never experience peace on earth, on earth as it is in heaven. You'll never experience that until you have peace with God, until you stop resisting God's will for you. So like Zechariah, he's trying to do something through you. He's also trying to do something in you, just like Zechariah. So is it possible that you may be missing that? I would encourage you, Hilltown, especially in this season, to be asking this question: Lord, what are you doing? Not what are you doing in the world? That's an important question. But here, this morning, ask, what are you doing in me? What are you trying to accomplish in me? How are you using this to shape me, to get my attention, and to get me aligned. And how might that turn out for my good? Because peace on earth begins in me. Now, we're going to shift. We're going to enjoy and celebrate the Lord's Supper together. We're going to celebrate communion together. But I want to tie it in to this story. So if you haven't yet, go ahead and grab one of the cups, one of the elements from the back there. And you can peel off, I know it takes a minute, you can peel off the top there and get that ready. And peel off the top for the wafer. But here's one of the questions that I was thinking as I was studying this passage this past week. I was just wondering, why John? Why the name John? And why bother naming John, right? I mean, it would make sense that God would say, I'm going to send this child, the Messiah, born of Mary, this virgin. And because it was the tradition for the parent to name the child, it would make sense that God would name Jesus, that he would declare his name to be Jesus. And the meaning of the name Jesus means God saves. The Hebrew word is Yeshua, from where we get Joshua. God saves. But what about John? John, Yohanan, means God is gracious. And the reason this is significant is because John will one day go on to become quite a preacher out in the wilderness, preaching repentance, preaching judgment. And some of the words that we're going to hear John speak, we're going to see him call some people vipers, some wicked religious leaders vipers. He's going to talk about the axe being laid at the foot of the tree, meaning the time's come, judgment's coming, reckoning day is coming. He's going to talk about this unquenchable fire. And his name is John. God is gracious. And the reason that's significant is because talking about approaching doom, talking about judgment, talking about the reality of a holy God that demands payment for sin is gracious, because he also pointed people to the free gift of salvation through faith in Jesus Christ, which is grace. So God is gracious, and that's what we're celebrating when we celebrate the Lord's Supper today. But just like John gave a warning, let me give this same warning. And Paul gave a warning. When he celebrated the Lord's Supper, he taught about the Lord's Supper in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. He said, don't eat this if your heart's not in the right place. Don't eat this if you're not one of the covenant community. If you're not part of the covenant people, don't eat and drink the sign of the covenant. Because if you do, you will eat and drink judgment upon yourself. So if you have placed your faith in Jesus Christ, then this sign is for you. If you have not, I want to invite you to consider these truths so that the next time we celebrate, you celebrate with us. We want you to be able to celebrate with us. But the demands of the gospel are simple, that we recognize our sin and our need of a Savior, and that we confess our sin to God and ask him for forgiveness, and believe in Jesus Christ, who paid for our sin on the cross. God, in order to win peace, went to war against sin. And the battle was fought and won on the cross, which is what this supper symbolizes. So Jesus, on the night that he was betrayed, before he went to the cross, took the bread and he broke it, and he said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Eat this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup and he said, This cup is the cup of the new covenant. This is my blood, which is poured out for you. Drink this in remembrance of me. And Paul says, every time we eat this bread and drink this cup, we proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. In other words, we're celebrating the second advent of Christ, the second coming of our King, every time we celebrate the Lord's Supper.